Did you miss me? We're back. That was what we called a 3-day Chag. We had the first 2 days of Passover, which are a holiday, a festival, so that we cannot do work. What is this? It's a new thing from Facebook. Please get off my screen. Okay. So it's a 3-day Chag. The first 2 days of Passover are a festival. We cannot do work, just like on Shabbat. The only difference between a festival and Shabbat is that we can cook on the festival, and then we went right into Shabbat. So for 3 days, we were incommunicado, no screens, no phones, no turning lights on and off, etc. So, coming back from 3 days, I'm excited to tell you that we're going to do a double daf tonight. We've got some really beautiful teachings from Shabbos. So we're in Tractate Shabbos, and tonight we're going to finish chapter 2 and begin chapter 3. So we're going to finish the 7th mishnah, chapter 2, and begin the first mishnah of chapter 3 in Tractate Shabbos. We'll be doing pages 35 and 36. It's great to see you all. Who's in the house? Where are you tuning in from? Are we all around the world? Do we have some countries? Do we have continents in the house? Please let us know where you're tuning in from. Before we continue, let us count the Omer. Starting on the second night of Passover, we begin counting the days, and we're going to count 7 weeks. That's 49 days plus a day. And then it will be Shavuos, right? So we counting from the time of the Exodus in Egypt, and then we count 50 days until we had the revelation, the 10 Commandments were given at Mount Sinai. So we're in a period of counting the Omer, and as long as we don't miss a day, we can say a blessing every time. If we forget to count a day, then we can no longer count with the blessing. So we haven't missed any nights yet. We counted the first night of the Omer on the second night of Passover. And then last night, which was Shabbat, we counted the second day of the Omer. And now we're going to count for tonight. It's very short, very brief, so join me in counting the Omer. I am prepared and ready to fulfill the positive commandment of counting the Omer, as is written in the Torah, quote, "You shall count 7 complete weeks from the day following the Passover rest day, when you brought the Omer as a wave offering. To the day after the 7th week, you shall count 50 days. Then you shall present a meal offering of new grain to the Lord. May the pleasantness of the Lord our God be upon us. Establish for us the work of our hands. Establish the work of our hands. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al sefiras haomer." Today is the 3rd day of the Omer, which is 3 days and 0 weeks. And there's a little meditation that we do every time we count the Omer, because what we're trying to do is refine ourselves, elevate ourselves, perfect ourselves as we sort of leave slavery in Egypt and become ready to meet God, as it were, at Mount Sinai. And something that I often teach is that if we have, I've talked about this on our show, that if you go into Passover and you think, okay, I have a Pharaoh, right, some behavior, that self-destructive behavior that I'm enslaved to, that I haven't been able to break free of. So on Passover, I ask God to help me, right? I cry out to God, help me break free from this addiction to this behavior. It could be passivity, it could be arrogance, it could be anger, it could be impatience, it could be laziness, procrastination, smoking cigarettes, whatever it is for you. So we ask for help on Passover, and we recognize that breaking a habit that has enslaved us, it's not so simple. It's going to take time. So these 50 days of counting the Omer are a time to get that new self into place. And each day we do a meditation, and what we do is we meditate on the Sephiros, right? So these are the emanations of God. This is a Kabbalistic mystical practice. And we look at the 7 lower Sephiros. So this week we focus on Chesed. Chesed is loving kindness, right? So we start with loving kindness. Loving kindness is balanced by judgment, restraint, right? So these are the primary forces with which God acts on the world. Loving kindness is everything that he gives us. Judgment, of course, is how he judges us, or how he restrains the flow of loving kindness, because actually unchecked loving kindness in a person leads to great harm, right? You have to balance. You can't just always do the loving kind thing. Like an overabundance of love for somebody will ultimately enable them to do wrong, right? So we balance loving kindness with good judgment. So this whole week we focus on loving kindness. On the first night of the Counting the Omer, it was the loving kindness aspect of loving kindness. On the second night, it's the judgment aspect of loving kindness. And tonight, it's the tiferes of loving kindness, which is the beauty, the harmony, the balance of loving kindness, right? So if you think about what it is you're trying to break free, you might think, well, if I do free myself from that behavior, won't that be a kindness to the people around me? So maybe that motivates you. And then you think, okay, so the loving kindness aspect of that is, I love those people, so I really got to do this. The judgment aspect, I'm not going to break through this unless I am showing good judgment in my daily practice, unless I have a system that I've written out so that I can manage this, to take notes, whatever it is. This is all for another day. It's not what we're doing tonight. This is just how I approach it. And tonight, the tiferes of loving kindness, so the thing that I'm trying to break free of, I'm going to keep it to myself. You don't need to share the behavior you're trying to break free of, what you've asked God to help you. But the thing that I'm trying to break free of, okay, there's a loving kindness, how good it'll be for everyone around me if I do it. Good judgment. I need to show good judgment on a daily basis in order to make this happen. Balancing, the balancing act. Okay, I know what I can do and what I can't do. I can move a little bit further each day in adopting this new me, and so on. That's counting the Omer. Now we have done that. Okay, as I said, tonight we're covering, it's a double daf. We're back, we're doing a double show because we were offline for 3 days. So we're going to be covering Shabbos, Tractate Shabbos of the Talmud, pages 35 and 36. We'll be finishing chapter 2, finishing commentary on the 7th mishnah, which completes chapter 2, and entering chapter 3 in the first mishnah of chapter 3. So to review, the mishnah that we've been covering is right when a family is getting ready to take on Shabbat, the head of the household asks 3 questions to say, okay, are we ready, right? And the head of the household has to ask the other members of the household with calm, so that the head of the household will be heard and will be listened to. It's a beautiful teaching. So now that we're heading into twilight, right? Because Shabbat begins at sundown on Friday. But at what time does Shabbat actually begin? And so we've been looking at twilight. And what is twilight, right? Specifically, twilight is the time between day and night, right? So when does night actually begin? It was according to, I think, Reb Yosei, that, well, night begins, it's a split second. It's the blink of an eye. But we don't know when that blink of the eye is. We can't pin it down when day turns into night. So we have a period of uncertainty. And as we've discussed, because it's a period of uncertainty and we cannot be sure, so with respect to Torah laws, we're going to be stringent. And with respect to rabbinic laws, we're going to be lenient. That's the general principle. But now we're going to continue to try and pin down, okay, when does twilight begin and when does twilight end? How do we define twilight? So we know, for example, if we live in Santa Monica, right on the beach, if you live anywhere where you live on the Pacific Ocean, you live in America and you look at the Pacific Ocean, right? Or you live in Israel and you can look at the Mediterranean, anywhere where you can look west over a large body of water, okay, then it's simple because you can see the horizon. Same if you live in a desert, that's a flat desert, right? So you can see the sun sink below the horizon. So now you know for sure that's when twilight begins. But what if you don't live near a big body of water? You're not sure when the sun actually went down below the horizon because there's buildings or hills or whatnot. You can't tell. So our sages said there's a whole bunch of definitions of twilight that have to do with the color of the sky. And there are different definitions about half the sky being one color, half the sky being the other color. And they argue, well, is that in the west or in the east? And when I read that, I thought, well, obviously it's in the west, right? The sun goes down in the west. What am I looking for at the east? The east is just going to go dark, right? But actually, last night I stepped out on my porch and I saw that around twilight, there was beautiful red, being reflected on the clouds in the east. I could see beautiful red colors in the east. So now I understand a little better why they talk about the sky. But the sky is not a really great thing because there could be clouds, sometimes not clouds. So they come up with some other ideas. And we learned that, well, if you can pin down when twilight begins, not always easy, right? Depending on where you are. But if you can pin down when twilight begins, so then the question is, how long does twilight last? And a few days ago, we discussed that it could be as long as it takes to walk 3/4 of a mil, which is about half a mile. About the time it takes the average person to walk half a mile. So today on Shabbos, page 35, we get another definition of the amount of time that the average person spends walking. And it's very beautiful. It's a person who climbs to the top of Mt Carmel. Okay, so Mt Carmel in Israel. Mt Carmel is there. You can find Mt Carmel. And from the top of Mt Carmel, maybe you can see the sun go down. For sure you can see the sun go down over the horizon. Someone will tell me, can you see the sun go down into the Mediterranean? I'm not sure about that. But you can see the sun go down on the horizon. And then how long does twilight last? Until you walk down Mount Carmel and reach the Sea of Galilee, get in the Sea of Galilee, and get out. Isn't that a beautiful measure of time? Walk down, get in the Sea of Galilee, get out. By the time you get out, twilight is over. It is now night. It's Shabbos, right? Incidentally, since we're talking about climbing Mount Carmel, we learn, this is just so pretty. Now, who said this? I want to give credit to the one who say it. Rabbi Hiya. So Rabbi Hiya says, if you climb Mount Carmel in the Holy Land and you look down on the Sea of Galilee, in Hebrew the Kinneret, and you look in the middle, if you can make out a sieve-shaped rock, probably it's not so easy all the time. Maybe the water has to be clear. Maybe the light has to be right. Maybe the water level has to be a little low. I'm not sure. But if you're standing on top of Mount Carmel and you can see a sieve-shaped rock in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, then you are seeing the well of Miriam. Miriam's well, this is one of those, I feel like I got to get to Israel as soon as possible, walk up Mount Carmel and see if I can see that sieve-shaped rock. Miriam's well is what kept us drinking water for 40 years in the desert, right? So we have a tradition that the water that was given to the children of Israel as we wandered in the desert for 40 years was given in the merit of Moses' sister, Miriam. She was a prophetess. She was incredibly holy. She saved Moses' life. And, when he was put in the, didn't save his life, but accompanied him when he was put in the basket in the river, in the Nile, and ended up being found by Pharaoh's daughter. But it was Miriam who said, oh, would you like to get a wet nurse for this baby? I know a lady who could nurse him. And of course, it was Moses' own mother. And that's how Moses got, physically and spiritually and literally teachings of the Jewish people as a baby, because he was brought back to his mother by his sister to be nursed, and then eventually went back into the palace. Once we were wandering in the desert, we left Egypt, we were saved from bondage in Egypt, we were wandering in the desert, so it was an encampment in a desert, right? There's no water, no water. But everywhere we went, there was a rock, right, that miraculously traveled with us. It's not hard to imagine. We also had God himself accompanying us with a manifestation of a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. So it's certainly no more stretch of the spiritual imagination to picture that there was a rock that went with the people, and when they would encamp in a place, water would come out of it. But not water like a water fountain and people walked up and filled their jugs from the water fountain. I mean, there were 2 million people in this encampment. How could everybody get their water each day if it was like a water fountain? My friends, have you ever seen the fountains at Bellagio or pictures of it in Las Vegas? That's what Miriam's well was like. It was like a rock with huge fountains of jets of water going all over the place. So much so that the encampment that the Israelites had in the desert actually had canals of water. Wherever they would settle for a few days, there would be canals of water between the tribes. They actually had little canoes they could ride around and visit each other around this massive encampment with 2 million people in the desert. And all that water that the people drank and even used as transportation in this little sort of portable Venice, as it were, with canals, came from Miriam's well. And according to Rabbi Chia, if you climb up Mt Carmel and look down into the Sea of Galilee and see a sieve-shaped rock, you are looking at Miriam's well. And so we just happen to, we note that incidentally because what we were actually doing is defining the length of time that Twilight occupies, which you could climb Mount Carmel and walk down to the Sea of Galilee and immerse. Okay, let us continue. Miriam's well, the sieve-shaped rock. Okay, and that brings us to the much more familiar measure of time that a lot of people have heard of, maybe most people have heard of, most Jews have heard this, right? When does Shabbat end? When you see 3 stars in the sky. Where do we get that? So Rav Yehuda said, in the name of Shmuel, when you can see 1 medium-sized star in the sky, it's still day. When you see 2 medium-sized stars in the sky, it's twilight. When you see 3 medium-shaped stars in the sky, it's nighttime, right? And when it's nighttime on Saturday night, so Shabbat is over, then you can begin the work of the week. You can go live with your friends and have a Talmud class via Facebook, etc., right? So the earliest that you can do that is when you see 3 stars in the sky. And that is a much more, commonly known measure of when twilight ends and when nighttime begins. However, we learned that in ancient Israel, they had a practice which was so cool. I'm very fond of shofar, of blowing the shofar, of blasting the shofar. So what they had was a system, and this is now you get a little bit of an insight into what life was like in ancient Israel. So come Friday evening, you could expect in your village, in your town, or in your city that there would be 6 blasts of the shofar. This is the system that they used in ancient Israel. The first blast is a signal to the people who work in the fields. Put down your field tools, walk back into the city. The time for farming in the fields is done. Walk back to your homes. A little later, the second blast. A signal to the people in the cities. Time to stop work. They don't have to walk back to the city, so they can work a little bit later. But at the second blast, stop working, go home. If you're in the marketplace, close up your stall, shutter it up. It's time for all the business in the city to stop. Third blast. Time to light the Shabbos lamp. Time to light the Shabbos lamp. For some people, it was time to remove their tefillin. In ancient Israel, some people wore their tefillin all day. Not everybody, but the more machmir people, the more religious people did, men. But the third blast means light the Shabbos lamp. Right? Now remember, we light the Shabbos lamp when it's still day. Even today, right, women will light the Shabbos candles. They'll do candle lighting, say a blessing, and then for them it's Shabbat. And yet men will go to synagogue, like in my neighborhood, and we have a beautiful minyan that meets up the street, and we start our Kabbalah Shabbos prayer service with mincha, right? So we're actually saying the afternoon prayer. Now, if it was already Shabbos, we couldn't be saying the afternoon prayer of the daytime. So we light the candles, it's still daytime, right? And we actually have about 18 minutes until we enter that twilight period. So the third blast tells you, light the Shabbos lamps. And then there's going to be 3 blasts together, and it's tikiyah, teruah, tikiyah, which sounds like this. I'm sorry, I messed it up. Sorry. Belay that. I messed it up. Again, this is how it works. That's it. Tikiyah, teruah, tikiyah. And after you've heard those 3 blasts that go together, it's Shabbos, right? Then Shabbos begins. And that's the way it was done in ancient Israel. Now, once we learn that that was the system for notifying people, Shabbos is coming, Shabbos is close, Shabbos is right here, light the Shabbos lamps, then, right, tikiyah, teruah, tikiyah, it's Shabbos, right? So we learn that. But then we learn from Rabbi Yossi Bar Hanina, says that if you hear the 6th blast and you're scrambling, right, and you're not quite ready for Shabbos, he says, well, you have a little bit of time because the guy who blasts the shofar for the city or for the town, he has to get home, right? He has to get home with his shofar. But if that's true, then other sages object, go, wait a minute, that can't be so. Because if that's true, then every city is going to have a different time, depending on how far away the shofar blaster lives from his house, right? So then they start to argue it can't be like that, so how did they actually handle it? So one possibility was, so he had a place that he could stash his shofar. The question that's really being asked is, because what if Shabbat did come in? We know that you cannot blow a shofar on Shabbat. So it's prohibited to blow your shofar on Shabbat. It's a prohibited use on Shabbat. So, but why can't he just walk home carrying his Shabbat? You can't carry on Shabbat from the public domain into the private domain, but if he's in the city, in a walled city, so then there's an Erev. The wall around the city acts as an Erev, and he can carry back home. So it's not a question of carrying. The question becomes, can you move an object that has no permitted use on Shabbat? So then the sages say, well, wait a minute. The shofar can be moved because it has a permitted use. You can't blow the shofar on Shabbat, but you could use it to give a baby medicine, right? Like you can invert it like this, and you can pour like medicine in the big end, and then it'll drip out the little end, and you can use it to give medicine or liquid to a baby. So there's a permitted use, therefore you can move the shofar. But others say you don't even have to resort to that because even though you can't blow the shofar during the week, you can move it, right? Either just because you need its place or because you're going to use it for a permitted purpose, and that's according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, right? Rabbi Shimon permits us, even though the object has no permitted use, that its primary use, the object's primary use is prohibited on Shabbos. If it has some use that it could be done, or just because you need the place where it's lying, so you can move it. Whereas others hold you can't even move it. It's that kind of object. So then we have a teaching that says shofars may be moved on Shabbos, trumpets may not, right? And that supports this view. That's why a shofar can be moved on Shabbos, because it has a permitted use, that you can use it to give medicine or liquid to a baby. whereas a trumpet doesn't have that kind of a use. It's only used for, signaling to people, and that's a prohibited use on Shabbos. But then we have a contradictory teaching. This is elsewhere in the Talmud. We have a brisa that says that one may move shofars and trumpets on Shabbos. And so our sages ask, well, what do you mean? You just said you can move a shofar, we understand, because it has a permitted use on Shabbos, but you can't move a trumpet because it has no permitted use. Maybe according to Rabbi Shimon, you can move it just because you need its place. But a different explanation is offered, which is, and this is according to, who was it that changed it? Who was it that offers this teaching? It's because Rabbi Shimon, sorry, just want to make sure I get it right. I think it's Rav Hista says, so Rav Hista says, it's because the word trumpet, which is tzoitzera, probably not pronouncing that right, but tzoitzera, trumpet, that word in Hebrew later came to mean shofar. So when it says that you can move shofars and trumpets on Shabbos, it's not because you can move those big brass or silver or whatever, those big metal trumpets that are only used for signaling the public. It's not that you can move them for this under the same rationale as the shofar. It's because that word came to mean shofar. And that's very important to understand, right? Because if you think the Torah was given when we left Egypt, right, and at Mount Sinai, and by the time they're discussing these laws, right, even for the Mishnah, so the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, so that's 1,400 years later, right? Over 1,400 years, words shift. I mean, we see that in our society. That's something that, I can't think of an example right now. Maybe somebody can put one in the comments. But a word that means something today had a quite different meaning, even 20 years ago, certainly 50 years ago. It's an interesting case of that, the word gay, right? Gay. Today, gay generally means homosexual, right? But 50 years ago, gay didn't mean that at all. I don't think it even possessed that meaning at all. Gay literally meant, happy, upbeat, etc. So words change in meaning, and likewise with Lashon Kodesh, with the holy tongue, the holy language. Even there were meanings that changed over time, particularly in sort of common usage of the people. And so our sages account for the fact that this word that meant trumpet earlier came to mean shofars as well. And it was both things that could be moved on Shabbos, even though they could not be blasted on Shabbos. And with that, we finish our seeking to define what twilight is, how long it lasts, and we complete chapter 2 of Tractate Shabbos. So in chapter 2, mostly we learned about with what may we light the Shabbos light, right? And so with the oils and the wicks, and we saw that what we want to generally do is get a steady flame so that it doesn't come to sputter. We saw that there was quite a difference between a Shabbos light and a Hanukkah light. And then we were talking about when we light and how we move into Shabbos. So we talked really about what twilight is and how we get ready to light the Shabbos light. Now we move on to chapter 3. We enter chapter 3 in the middle of page 36. And our new mishnah on page 36 of Tractate Shabbos, now we're moving into cooking, right? So now that we've been doing, we just did Shabbos light, right? And the Shabbos lamp, and what may we do the Shabbos lamp? And chapter 1, what was chapter 1 all about? Chapter 1 was about carrying, then transferring from one domain to another. Chapter 3 is going to be about cooking, right? And so we start with, it's a big deal, right? We want to have a nice Shabbos dinner, but we can't cook on Shabbos. So how ready does the dinner have to be before Shabbos begins? Can we keep it warm is the question that's really being asked. And so the Mishnah goes like this: with regard to a stove that was lit on Shabbat Eve with straw or with rakings, meaning something that just burns very quickly. So for sure, that's already gone out. It just it burned quick and goes out. So it doesn't matter. We can leave hot water or cook food on a stove where we just burn hay inside, because for sure that hay is out. But if that stove, what was keeping the pot warm, is something that's a longer lasting fuel, like wood, or, they had sort of slow burning fuels in the old days that were made out of seeds and oils and other kinds of compressed things. They had a slow burning fuel, sort of like a Duraflame log, right? You can imagine that. So if you use that kind of a thing, so could you leave the pot on the stove? You can't add fuel to it for sure. You can't rake the coals for sure. The danger is that you might come to move the coals to stir up the flame to add a little more heat. And our sages are going to protect us from that. There's going to be a disagreement between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, right? That Beis Shammai said, unless you remove all the coals from the stove, you can't keep something on the stove, and you can't put it back on the stove if you take it off. And Beis Hillel is going to permit that, right? You're going to be able to leave not only water, but cooked food. So Beis Shammai is going to say, water, yes, cooked food, no. But only if you've already swept out the coals. Beis Hillel is going to say, well, if you swept out the coals or put ashes on them so that it doesn't catch fire again, so then you can leave hot water on that stove to stay warm, or cooked food. Beis Shammai says in that situation you could take it off, but you can't put it back. Beis Hillel says you can put it back. The law has actually expanded a little bit because there's other commentaries that were later than the Mishnah, and the law now follows those, which says that you can keep food on that source of warmth, right? You don't have to sweep out the coals. You could just leave them there. As long, but you don't leave a burner on so that the food keeps cooking. It's just so that the food is warm. I think now we can even say finish it. It can keep cooking as long as it was cooked. Like it was basically cooked. And so what you're adding to it, to our mind, it's like still cooking, but in terms of the significant act of cooking, no, it's already been done. The food needed to be at least half cooked. That's why we have cholent, right? Cholent is something where the meat has to be browned on Friday, but then it can just stay in the oven and continue cooking all through Shabbos. The only reason that's possible is because the significant act of cooking already happened on Friday. So we're going to see that there's a little bit of an evolution of how we understand this Mishnah, even from the rabbis of the Mishnah. The rabbis of the Talmud are going to open that up a little bit, and that's the law that we follow now. Generally, that as long as it's significantly cooked on Friday, it can stay in the fire. But it has to be very clear that that fire can in no way be adjusted. And if there's a danger that you're going to adjust it, and this is why you wouldn't do it on a stovetop, right? You don't do it on a stovetop unless you can tape down the dials, because you may come to adjust the flame. And as soon as you adjust the flame, you have violated Shabbos, right? So that's what we're going to be studying as we continue in chapter 3. Okay, I'm going to scan the comments to see if there's questions or other comments. So if you've got something, you can add it now. Ben Ohana said, Modim l'simcha. I hope you had an awesome Passover. So right now we're in Chol HaMoed, Passover, the intermediate days of Passover. There's going to be 3 of them, right? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And then Tuesday night, we enter into 7th and 8th day Passover. So we're going to go dark again. There won't be AT Daily shows on Thursday and Friday. But I could probably do one on like Wednesday morning and Thursday. It's Wednesday and Thursday, because Friday is not a holiday at all. Passover is going to end Thursday night. But now that we're in the intermediate days of Passover, the way we greet each other is we say, as Ben wrote here, Modim l'simcha. Modim l'simcha. Okay, I'm not seeing any new comments, so fantastic. My pals, it's fantastic to share this teaching with you. It's exciting. Today we learned about Miriam's well. May we all merit to stand on top of Mt Carmel, look into the Sea of Galilee, spot a sieve-shaped rock, and know that we're going to be looking at Miriam's well, which provided the water, the extreme beautiful fountains of water, when we, the children of Israel, were wandering in the desert for for 40 years. Sending you all big love, and with God's help, look forward to continuing our learning tomorrow, Sunday. Take care.